Okay, so we are starting with NOTAMs, and there are 5 categories. Distant. Just a review. You should be able to look at it and get a review. Somebody's going to tell me when, right? Special use airspace. What about special use airspace? Why do they have special use airspace NOTAMs? Come on. Why do they have special use airspace NOTAMs? Pardon? Are you sure? Is that what your notes say? What do your notes say? That's correct. Is it when special use airspace is going to be active at any other time other than the normally scheduled times for that airspace? So that's what special use airspace NOTAM says. Like, we got an airspace requirement here. They don't normally, like for example, we talked about Lemoore Naval Air Station. The fact that the tower closes down at 10 o'clock at night, but if the tower is going to remain open for some reason or other, like for military exercises, there will be a NOTAM saying the tower at Lemoore Naval Air Station will remain open until whatever time, 1 o'clock in the morning, instead of closing at 10 o'clock at night. I would say outside the published schedule. So you need to remember these things. Military NOTAMs. And what about that? Do you have that in your notes as well? No? Nico, you said yes. All right, okay. What's interesting is that, for the most part, the huge percentage of navigation aids and airports in the United States can and are being used by the military as well. So it won't be quite a different sort of NOTAM unless it's, for example, for a particular air base, like McCord Air Force Base up in Tacoma, Washington. One of my former glider students is up there flying the C-17. When he comes down, hopefully he'll come down in the next week or two, and if he does, I'd like to have him come in and talk to you all about his experiences learning to fly gliders, then power, then going through the Air Force Academy, and then winding up the captain of a C-17. TFRs. Oh, you need to go back? Okay. Calm down, everybody. Christmas will be here soon. Don't worry about it. Pardon? Everybody got it now? Damien writes so perfectly and so neatly and so small that he could probably put the Star Spangled Banner on a postage stamp and get it all on there. Right, Damien? Okay, temporary flight restrictions. You just want to say to yourself, you can never fly a drone anywhere at any time unless you have called to make sure that there is not a TFR in effect somewhere in your area. And it doesn't take much. All you have to do is call that 1-800-weather brief or get on tfr.faa.gov. That website will show it. I think we've covered this before. Your notes should also be that we have covered this part of the lecture. It is extremely important that you do not violate a TFR. from lack of knowledge. Now, if for some reason or another the drone gets away from you, or it does a flyaway, or you lose a down and upload links, and it winds up going into a TFR, remember, the majority of TFRs in the Central Valley are fire-related. Fire-related. Once in a while, we'll get a presidential or a vice presidential or a Secretary of State visit to FAT, in which case the 30-mile radius around FAT would probably encompass Reedley. I don't know for sure. Is that true? I'll have to think about that. But in any event, the majority of TFRs in this area are fire-related. Jacob?
So if the president somehow makes it a federal international airport, what about the people that are coming in?
They scatter them away. If you're in an airplane and you're approaching FAT, and so is the president, go around and get you outside the 30-mile radius. Do it.
So what if you pay the schedule to go to that?
What if you what?
For example, you're coming from LA to Fresno, and you're on the plane, and the president gets there. What happens to you?
You are kept in the air until the president gets out of his aircraft and goes wherever he's going to go, in his motorcade or on a helicopter. Osvaldo. You mean if there were airplanes in the air and they wanted to land? They might want to go to an alternate, but generally speaking, they have a pretty good idea, for example, when the president's going in FAT, how long it's going to take him to get on the ground, parked, out of the aircraft, into the motorcade or into a helicopter and gone. And it's usually not a long length of time, but generally speaking, the commuter airlines that are coming out of San Francisco and LA are warned ahead of time there probably is going to be a presidential visit at FAT, and they have to prepare for it. So the purpose of a TFR is, and that's the fundamental thing, isn't it? This is one of those questions that's going to be on the exam, and if you remember persons and property in the air and on the ground, that question will come up, and it has to do with TFRs and safety flying drones, and the reason why you don't want to fly drones over people and gatherings, because you don't want to endanger people and property in the air or on the ground. It's one of those things you want to put a little asterisk next to that answer, because that's probably going to come up more often than not. And especially if you're in and around Reedley, if you're flying a drone in and around Reedley, you need to know the traffic pattern at Reedley, and that's something we're going to talk about. Provide safety for disaster relief aircraft. That's mainly the disaster would be the fires up in Northern California, the fires in Southern California, the hurricane on the East Coast, the blizzards on the East Coast. You all should be so happy that you live here in California when you look on television, when you see on television the tremendous blizzards that people are having to fight through back in the East. And here's another example, prevent unsafe congestion, because, of course, as soon as something happens, there's a major accident or a big pileup on Interstate 5 or 99, everybody wants to go over there and take a look at it. So you have news helicopters, and they all want to go over there and hang around. And it's likely that if it's a big enough pileup, and if it looks like it's going to last a while, they'll probably implement a TFR. Or a football game, or a high school championship game, or anything you could think of that might bring a lot of drones together in one place. And I think this last one has more to do with the fact that the lava that's flowing all over that island, the big island of Hawaii. I doubt that you'll get a question on a particular state like Hawaii. You'll get general questions about persons and property in the air or on the ground, disaster relief. You'll get questions like that. And whose responsibility is to make sure that not only do you know about it, but that you allow for it? Pilot and command. Yeah, and there were some questions on that test, one in particular that had to do with, the answer was remote pilot and command. Remember, when in doubt, you are responsible. That's why you get paid. You're responsible for a lot of things, everything connected with that remote pilot operation. And here's the one we talked. Somebody mentioned earlier about protecting the president and other public figures. Airspace requirements. You want to go back? Okay. Just remember, if there's a question on the exam about the reason for a TFR, think about it. Think about the logic of what you're reading. You know, it might have so somebody can land and go to the bathroom. You know, you certainly wouldn't check that answer, would you? So, read it carefully. Think about what the answer is and see if the other two possibilities make any sense at all. And there were a couple of questions on the exam that people missed and could have gotten. They probably could have gotten a 21 or higher if they had looked carefully at the logic of the other two possible answers and not chosen either one of them. Everybody ready? Remember, you can always get on TV. You can always get on the internet and see this. Airspace requirements for the TFR. This is a general design of a TFR, especially concerning fires in California. And it wouldn't hurt any of you to get on the internet and look up www.tfr.faa.gov just to see where the TFRs right now, today, where they are and for what reason. It would give you a good idea. It would give you more familiarity with how they identify it, what the ring around the area looks like, where it's centered on, because they can't just tell you here's a radius. They have to tell you where it is centered on. And here we are with that 3 nautical mile radius again, right? So the logic is that if you get a question on the exam about a TFR inside Class B, C, and D airspace, your answer obviously is no. There's no reason for it because you already have enough restrictions in C, D, B, C, and D to be able to maintain some control over, for example, fire. So if a fire erupted within Fresno's Class Charlie airspace, there would be no TFR. As you know, because there have been apartment fires and there have been building fires, and no TFRs will come into play because it's already controlled airspace. TFRs are in areas that are not controlled airspace unless the president is landing in a controlled airspace. And remember, that 3 mile radius follows Air Force One wherever it goes. And it's even bigger when it's up at altitude. But down near the ground, that circle around the presidential aircraft is going to follow him all the way from, say, L.A. up here to Fresno. Not only does the FAA have TFR information, but so does an organization like the AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and you can get on their website and you can look up, you don't have to be a member, you can look up any TFR information. Jacob?
So what about like mid-evac helicopters?
What about them?
If they're in the presidential circle?
If they're inside the presidential circle, I think they would keep them on the ground until the president landed.
Even mid-evac, like
I don't know. I don't know how severe an emergency would be. If somebody was critically injured and dying, I suspect that they would allow the medevac helicopter, but I don't know. That's a gray area, and it probably is a good thing to think about, maybe a good thing to research. And the reason I made it red is never assume that there's not a TFR in your area. It may be just far enough away so you don't know about it, but just close enough so that circle, the 3 nautical miles, grabs you and prevents you from flying anything. And usually, if it's a TFR for a fire, it will go from the ground up. It won't just be something in the air. And there are places like Northern California where there's a TFR always in existence around Beale Air Force Base, where they fly the SR-71. So never assume anything at all about a TFR. You make sure, you're the pilot in command, you make sure that you understand if there's any TFRs in the area where you intend to fly a drone. I cannot emphasize enough that it's your responsibility to make sure that you check for any TFRs before you do anything. So you also need to understand airport operations, and if you look at the Reedley Airport, and if you're near the Reedley Airport somewhere, you want to, what? If you're near the Reedley Airport, you want to make sure that you understand the approach paths that airplanes are likely to take and the departure paths they're likely to take. You can't guess. If you see an airplane taking off out of Reedley and they're going north and you're south of the airport, you can't automatically assume that that airplane is going to disappear into the atmosphere. It could very easily turn right around and come back over the area that you're flying in. Don't assume the initial direction of an airplane taking off from an airport or even coming in for a landing. Don't assume that they're going to miss you. So if you just assume that that's Reedley Airport, and then yes, there is left traffic for Reedley Airport, and the runway is 3.6 there, but it's 3.3 at Reedley. So it's a very similar representation of what you would expect to see at Reedley Airport in that vicinity. So if you were flying a drone anywhere in this area, anywhere out in here, you could have people coming in from out in this distance, landing at the airport. When they take off, they could be taking off in this area, or they could be making what is called a downwind departure and be coming down along this way. Just make sure you're familiar with airport patterns, and if you're near an airport, understand what the airplanes are going to do. So if you understand what they're going to do, you can stay out of their way, you can avoid mid-air collisions. Towered airports. It's entirely possible that you would have a reason as a pilot in command, and you're being paid for your services, to fly a drone off the runways at FAT. Maybe you've been hired by an organization in Reedley, a newspaper organization in Reedley, and they want you to take pictures of some of the aircraft taking off out of FAT. So you would call the tower, tell them what you would like to do, that you would like to have the drone on the runway, not on the runway, but on the ramp area, ready to take off, that you're going to lift off maybe to 400 feet, that you're going to be filming the arrival and departure of commercial airliners. Those are the kind of things. And so as a result, you have to remember that if they tell you to do something, you do it. So, and at towered airport, you want to make sure that you don't do anything unless the tower has either agreed with your request or has issued you a directive by saying, hold in position, or remain at the ramp, or you will be given further directions in 2 minutes. They will often do that. They'll give you a expect further clearance time. In the instrument conditions, expect further clearance means they're going to get back to you within, say, 2 to 3 minutes and give you a second or a succeeding clearance. And then, again, it's not up to you to decide what pattern you want to fly, especially at a place like FAT. If you're on the ground near Reedley, you're the guy that's in command. You're the man or woman who is in command, and therefore you can fly whatever direction you think is safe. But when you're in a towered airport configuration, you have to follow whatever the aircraft or whatever the tower people tell you to do. Now, you're going to be talking to probably different people. You're going to be talking to ground control people, as you know. You'll also be talking to tower people when they clear you for takeoff. And when they watch you hover over the airport somewhere making videos of the landing and departing aircraft. Which means also that you have to become familiar with, and there will be some questions on the exam about the markings on an airport. They won't be real detailed because you'll never be able to memorize all of them unless you're a high-time pilot and you've encountered them time and time again. But there are markings on the airport that are very important for you to understand. For example, anything that has to do with runways is red and white. Anything that has to do with taxiways are yellow and black. And it depends on whether it's yellow on black or black on yellow, red on white or white on red. Andrew. Sure. The most important, of course, is the runway hold line. The runway hold line. If you are near the end of the runway, if the tower has asked you to take your drone to near the end of the runway, you don't ever want to cross the runway hold line unless you've been given specific instructions to do so, in which case you repeat exactly to the tower. If he or she says, you're cleared for takeoff runway 29 left, that's exactly what you say back to her. Roger, drone 456 cleared for takeoff runway 29 left. She will not allow you to move an inch unless you repeat back exactly what she said, he or she. And on the ground, these are the markings. You're not going to remember them all. Just try to remember the generality of red and white indicate runways, black and yellow indicate taxiways. And this is the runway hold line right here, the most important one. So you want to remember that for sure. These are just directions, giving you different directions to different places. Like this is continue straight ahead for runway 22. For taxiway at Lima, make an angled turn. For taxiway Juliet, make a right turn. So pretty well indicates that the things that you would expect. But again, because you're flying drones and you don't have to worry about taxiing, most of your instructions are going to be about lifting off when, remaining hovering over some spot on the runway. They might have to ask you to hover over taxiway alpha. Well, you have to know where taxiway alpha is in order to be able to hover over it. So before you ever go to FAT, you will have an airport diagram that tells you in detail where that is. And I think I have one here to show you in a minute. So here's the runway holding. Oops, sorry. Now I know how it happens. Okay, so we're going to continue. And so the holding position is that one up there, and so this is the one you want to remember. And the solid lines are on the side where you are before you're allowed to go out on the runway. The dash lines, the hatch lines up here, are on the runway side. So you're being blocked before you can go across it. Again, this is very similar to what I showed for Reedley, a little more detailed. It gives the words of what the approach and departure paths are. You need to be familiar with it. You can't just say, "Oh yeah, well I promise I won't stay anywhere near the airport." That's okay if you're not near the airport. You need to know though where the airplanes are that are coming into that airport. That's the most important part about learning the pattern at an airport like Reedley, so that you can anticipate the paths that aircraft will follow as they approach the airport. Here's some more indications. Again, I don't expect you to memorize. Under non-towered airports, and there it's important that you do most of the talking on your radio. Say nearly everything you plan to do, say it out loud, say it on the radio, announce to any traffic that might be in the area what your intentions are. Even to the extent where if somebody was flying around and they heard you say drone at Reedley, they might come over and land at Reedley because maybe they've been looking for hiring a drone pilot in command. And as soon as they hear the words that you're announcing you're a drone pilot at Reedley, you might get more business. Your best bet is never say too little. You want to specifically, and many of you got that question right, by the way, when it was Zephyr Hills. Remember it was Zephyr Hills? and the emphasis was to make sure that you tell people exactly where you are. And I even had that trouble with my powered students. We'll be coming into Fresno and I'll say, Chandler traffic, this is Cessna 123, 6 miles west. Or I'm 6 miles out landing. 6 miles out, what does that mean? You got a 360-degree direction. 6 miles is 360-degree. So an airplane coming into that area has no idea where that 6 miles out is. So you got to be very specific about where you're located and what your drone is going to be doing. And it's, again, an important thing to note that if you are flying a drone and you're flying it at reasonable speeds, you can also identify the fact that you are flying it at speeds in excess of, let's say, 80 miles an hour, which is legal. And in this particular case, I've made an indication of don't forget to note the type of aircraft you're flying. Well, it's more important actually to say drone, because if you're flying an aircraft, then generally another aircraft will have a pretty good idea about how to avoid you, but a drone is hovering in the air half the time. So if you're going to be doing any kind of pattern flying around an airport, you'll always fly a left-hand pattern. On the aeronautical chart, it shows next to, right below, the information about an airport. If there's an RP 30 or RP 22 or RP 05 or RP anything, it means that that particular runway, if you're going to land on runway 30, it is right pattern, so RP. And you'll take a look at your aeronautical charts that I gave you copies of some time ago, and you'll see somewhere on there. Look at Firebaugh, maybe Reedley, maybe even Reedley has an RP at the bottom of it. I don't recall offhand. So most of the So as we're talking about non-towered airports, the markings on a non-towered airport are for the most part not regulatory, they're advisory. The markings on FAT, where it's a towered aircraft, those are regulatory. The markings on a non-towered airport like Reedley are for the most part advisory. That is, you would be well to follow them, but if you don't, nobody's going to knock you over the head and give you a citation. I just announced that, advisory in nature rather than regulatory. There's a big difference. In fact, in some smaller airports like Reedy, there may not even be a runway hold line. But if there is, like at Chandler, you don't have to observe it. You would do well to observe it. You ought to observe it, but it's not regulatory to observe it. It's advisory. Keep that in the back of your mind. The markings are advisory and not regulatory. And you know what the CTAF is, don't you? Anybody? CTAF? We talked about that. Common Traffic Advisory Frequency. CTAF, Common Traffic. It is the radio call frequency that exists at all non-towered airports. So what happens if a tower closes down at 10 o'clock at night? What is the CTAF? Anybody know? It's the tower frequency that was being used before the tower shut down. Now, the common traffic advisory frequency is still the tower frequency, but now you're not calling it a tower anymore. You are simply announcing your intentions to all the aircraft that might be in and around that airport. The same as you would do for a Reedley, you would do for an FAT if the tower closes down. You use the tower frequency. General rules in an air traffic controlled airspace. This is kind of common sense. Give them a break. Let them know well in advance what you plan to do. Even if you were going to go flying tomorrow at FAT, it wouldn't hurt at all to contact the tower and say, hey, I'd like to come over there tomorrow afternoon and fly my drone for whatever reason. Then they'll make a note in the computer system so that when you arrive the next day, everybody in the tower already knows that you're planning to be there to fly a drone. So give people enough notice in advance so that you're not surprising anybody with your arrival. Now, is there anything they can do about it? Well, they can make life a little bit complicated for you. They can slow you down. They can tell you, well, we don't want you to start until 4 o'clock, and you're thinking to yourself, I could be done by 4. Those are the situations in which, had you given them earlier notice, you probably would have been given clear sailing all the way through on your time schedule. So surprises are not something that air traffic control likes to deal with. So good idea to monitor radio transmissions too. For example, if you're at FAT and you're going to be flying a drone over some of the runways, it's a good idea to listen to the tower. Because the tower is going to be saying, Cessna 123, you're 3 miles out on the final cleared to land runway 29 left. Well, 29 left is probably going to be the runway closest to the ramp area where you're going to be, and the Cessna is 3 miles out, and they usually are going to be flying their approach at 1.5 miles a minute. That means they're 2 minutes out. So you know from that calculation, that quick calculation, that if you're going to photograph that Cessna landing, you've got 2 minutes in order to get your equipment up in the air and ready to go, if you've already been given the permission to photograph that inbound aircraft. And here in the Central Valley, it's really important, especially these days where the geese seem to be flying very low and they seem to be heading to places like Millerton Lake or the rivers to get into the warmer waters. So be careful. Wildlife in the air and on the ground are something that you have a responsibility to avoid. Let's see what else. Okay, so I think that's it. We'll call halt. Sure, I can go back. You want to go back? There. I'm planning on a quiz tomorrow. It'll be similar to the ones you guys did very well on, but it will cover the last few lectures. Everything from the time that we had this last quiz. Hey, pay attention to this message I have up on here. For all of you who plan to fly drones, this is the biggest issue today in aviation. The biggest single issue in aviation, and all the discussions In all the presentations by local organizations and by the FAA, this subject is number one on the minds of every pilot in the country. And you all here are planning to fly drones. You need to be aware that is the single biggest issue, period.
Yes, sir.